Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Ride Along. My name's Cole Kuno, and our guest today is the president of Jon Hart, Sharon Durham. Ms. Durham, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
So, Ms. Durham began her career working at AT&T, and she worked there for 13 years before changing companies and working at Rackspace, which is a cloud computing company. While working at these tech companies, she worked along the entire spectrum of the business's operations, from marketing to data science to product development. And for the last 2 years, she's been serving as the president of Jon Hart. So, Ms. Durham, you've had an incredible and amazing career, but I'm interested to know, what did you think you were going to do when you were coming up through high school?
I thought I was going to be an orthodontist, probably since, about the age of 6. My dad convinced me that that's what I wanted to do because he felt like there would always be crooked teeth in the world. And now I could really use one. But so all through college, even up until I think I had 100 credit hours of hardcore sciences on my way to orthodontics. I did an internship, did an internship with an oral surgeon, and was pretty bored by it all, quite honestly. And the oral surgeon at the time kind of gave me insight into what was happening in the industry. And so decided that wasn't for me, did some aptitude test, and realized that I probably wanted to take a different path. It was a first really big lesson for me into being more open-minded about opportunities in the future instead of putting on my blinders thinking that there was one path for me.
Right. So what initially drew you to telecommunications and wanting to work at AT&T?
I was being recruited as part of their leadership development program. I wanted to work at a very large company where I could change careers and still be in the same company. At the time, length of service was really important in the world. People were proud of being at the same company for 30 or 40 years, and that's what I grew up with. And so that was a model that I had in my mind that I wanted to do as well. And so being able to stay at one company for a long time was important to me.
Right. So like I mentioned, when you worked at Rackspace and AT&T, you worked in a bunch of different roles. And I think many students today who are coming up through and are interested in business think they have to specialize in something like just finance, just marketing. But you kind of are living proof that you can be more of a generalist in the working environment. How did you develop the skills to work effectively along the entire spectrum of operations?
Well, there were a few different things that were happening. One was that in this leadership development program that I did at AT&T, it was a rotational program. So every year you were in a completely different job in a completely different part of the business. So I started off in network operations, did roles in marketing, did roles in IT. And it really gets you comfortable with being uncomfortable and really exposes you to things that maybe you didn't even think that you were interested in. For me, what I found is no matter what role I was in, I always leaned towards the technical side of it. And so what that started to show me is that here you can be in all these different roles and still you gravitate towards the same area, the same focus area. And so that was, at the time, my insight into, the fact that I was in technology made sense. But at the same time, I didn't go the technology route because I loved technology. It was something that I realized over time that I had a knack for.
Right. So while working at AT&T and Rackspace, did you ultimately plan to come and work for a company like Jon Hart, or is that something that kind of happened along the way?
No, that was something that kind of happened. I, at the time had been working for corporate America for 20 years. And a lot of us hit that point where you want to have end-to-end ownership over something. One of the hardest things to deal with at working at any company in any job is that if you don't have end-to-end responsibility, that you can spend all of your time and energy and expertise on your piece of it, and it gets handed off to the next department or the next organization or the next person, and you can start to see it unravel. And so that can get really frustrating And so having that end-to-end responsibility was something that I was looking for. It's something that I had had in some roles in the past, but just not for the entire company. When it came to Jon Hart and manufacturing, what I realized about myself is that a system is a system, and that's really what I like. So technology is a bunch of systems, manufacturing is a system. And so you start to realize more and more, you kind of get deeper and deeper and start to realize what really excites you and what really drives you, even if you don't recognize what it is at the beginning.
So would you say that the skills you learned while working in tech companies have been transferable to the job that you work now?
Absolutely, without a doubt. It is, especially in technology and in IT, there's a lot of troubleshooting, looking for where part of a system is failing, trying to optimize, trying to do it more efficiently, looking at key indicators, examining the data. And so all of those skills really came into play, especially as I got to Jon Hart and realized there was a lot of process improvement that needed to be made. So it became much less about PowerPoint and presentations, which I think a lot of us get stuck in for a while, and more about actually being able to look at a system, figure out where its weaknesses are, and solve for them.
So there's obviously a lot of technical differences from working at a company like AT&T and working at a company like Jon Hart. But what would you say the biggest cultural difference you've experienced from your shift from tech industry to Jon Hart?
Definitely the absence of bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
It is, especially in tech, you can put together a 6-month plan, you can put together a year plan, and it immediately gets disrupted. And so planning cycles are crazy, and it doesn't matter how genius you are in trying to figure out strategy and then getting on your way to execution. You can quickly have to throw all that away and start over because of the disruption. And so that creates a lot of stress and rework and spin. And as a result, sometimes you feel like you're treading water. In consumer goods manufacturing, you can actually make a plan and you can execute it, and there's going to be some disruption along the way, but what you started off with and what you end up with resembles each other, which is good. I really like that part of it.
So what would you say your favorite part of working at Jon Hart is?
My favorite part is I think it's so multifaceted. So we have 400 retailers that are mom and pop shops for the most part that depend on us for our products, for them to be able to pay their bills. We have our internet customers that purchase from us directly. We have channel partners. And so I think the different facets of the distribution and sales channels, and also the fact that it's not just about what we're doing here in our building, but it's the 400 other businesses that we get to serve and support and help make them successful as well.
Mm-hmm. So working for a huge brand like Jon Hart, I'm sure you see all the time people wearing Jon Hart purses, Jon Hart backpacks. I myself have a Jon Hart dock kit. Do you feel a sense of pride when you see people wearing something that you played a huge part in getting it to them?
Yeah, without a doubt, especially when it's old and worn and you can tell they still love it and it's still working and they're still proud to have it. Yeah, it's the fact that it has such sticking power and that people treasure it it does your heart good for sure.
So I'd say a lot of people out there today kind of aspire to be in a position you are today as a high-level executive of a huge company. What do you think is the most important aspect of your character that has allowed you to get to where you are today?
I once heard a speaker talk about one of the things that he had noticed throughout his whole career, and as far as what made good leaders, and that there was one common trait and characteristic, and I couldn't agree with it more. I think it was Jack Welch who actually said this, and he said they all have a generosity gene. They're generous with their time. They're generous with their attention, with their advice. They're generous with their feelings. They're generous with what they can do for their employees. And I think that long term, that's the most important. I think that servant leadership is what really pans out over the long haul, and that if you can develop that and maintain it, that it makes a difference in your career.
Mm-hmm. So when evaluating your employees and seeing who is, the top of the top at Jon Hart, what would you say that the best retail workers and people who work in brands that y'all work at, what sticks out about them? What are their character traits?
So here and really anywhere, my favorite type of employee is someone who's not afraid to metaphorically walk through the door. So I think I and most people will give employees special projects or something that they need help with. It really kind of cracks the door open for them to try something new. And you would not believe how many people won't even stick their head through that door. They're afraid to walk through that door of something new. And so they stay behind it and they never branch out and they never develop. But there are some people where you crack the door open for them and they bust right through it. And they are energized by it. They're excited about it. They're fearless, but they're also open to feedback and constructive guidance. Those are my favorite by far. The people that I know that I don't have to worry about if they're doing everything that they can do, because I know their whole heart's in it.
Right. So if a student came up to you today and their dream is to work in a or for a brand like Jon Hart, what steps do you think they should take early on in their career to reach that goal?
So I think, and this is something that I learned from AT&T as well, and I think it's invaluable, is, man, learn the job from the ground up. The more you know about how things actually work from the front line and the ground up, the better decision maker you are later. I think that people fall in a trap where they think a role or a job is beneath them because of their education or because of their experience. And so they're not willing to roll up their sleeves and maybe do something that they see themselves as overqualified for. But man, if you can really learn those roles inside and out and multiple of them, then when everyone's sitting around a table trying to make decisions and they're all have, false assumptions in their heads about the way things work, but you are a voice of authority because you've actually been there, that's one of the best positions you can be in.
Mm-hmm. So as the president of Jon Hart, many people would probably imagine that you aren't very involved or not very familiar with, the actual production of the bags, but as, in learning the company from the ground up, have you, spent a lot of time in the manufacturing to learn more about the ins and outs of what goes into making a bag?
Oh, yes. More than I probably should at some point. But, part of it is that, geeking out about it is fun. But then also part of it is that if I'm seeing that a metric is suffering somewhere, I need to be able to understand what comes before that step and what goes after that step. I also need to be able to trust and verify that what is supposed to be happening is actually happening. So, and I think that people appreciate it, that I'm not going to just make a decision about something that I know nothing about, that I have a good understanding of it.
So coming up through your career and getting to where you are now, what would you say has driven you the most?
Driven me the most? Man, that's tough because you definitely go through phases within your career. But for me, I think the biggest drive, more than money, more than title, more than anything else, is a sense of belonging. I think that what can happen is when you're chasing a title or you're chasing a pay bracket, that you end up hustling and compromising who you are. And so you might hustle to fit in, you might hustle for acceptance, but you're never gonna achieve your full potential when you're hustling. I think that when you truly belong and you're kind of in the flow of the job, then that's when you really start to have drive and aspire to do great things for the right reasons, and it shows.
Awesome. Well, you've been able to give us some incredible perspective. And to kind of wrap things up, if a student came up to you today and asked, how could they reach a level of success that's similar to yours, what would you tell them? What steps should they take?
I would say that get a bunch of different experiences. Don't pigeonhole yourself into one area. That even if you're studying business and you have an opportunity to, have a analytics role in an IT department because you have the skills, even though maybe it's not the area, that those are things that you absolutely should do. And be humble uh, and stay in one place for a decent amount of time. There's when you can see that someone consistently job hops every year, you definitely start to question why that is. And so even if you're changing jobs within one company, but you're with the same company for 4 years or more, then that shows that that you can functionally operate and be successful in a company. And so that's something that people look for, and it's important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Durham. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been great.
Thank you, Cole. I've enjoyed it too.
All right.